The Profilers! It's time for our weekly rendezvous.
The podcast that tells you true cases of French crimes. And now, the finale of Infernal Triangle.
Enjoy the story.
What really united the two lovers as a couple? They took real pleasure when they made love together. Nothing else.
During his interrogations, Sylvain Dromard would never hint at a relationship of tenderness or affection with his mistress. It was purely sex that interested him. In fact, he stated that they were the best freeholds he could find, a phrase that particularly shocked the investigators, showing that Sylvain Dromard had no sentimental attachment whatsoever to his mistress.
Experts speak of Sylvain Dromard as a very egocentric person with narcissistic impulses. He's the center of the world, and everyone around him is at his service. And his first victim of mood swings was his mistress. Sylvain Dromard is an extremely jealous man. When he calls his mistress and she doesn't answer right away at work, he arrives on site to cause a scandal. He considered his mistress to be an object, his object. In the investigation file, there's a love letter from Muriel Bonin to Sylvain, and she declares, "I don't judge you. I admire you. I respect you. Come back to me quickly, very quickly."
Specialists see this as a fascination on the part of the mistress, as if she were saying to herself, "He killed her for me. He killed his wife for me." They can also see something else in this letter: fear. But the experts don't really believe in Muriel Bonin's submissive, impressionable side. And they even wonder, in the end, who's manipulating who.
After several days in prison, without seeing each other, the judge decides to confront the two lovers. In an ideal scenario, the judge was hoping for a confession to a crime of passion, that Sylvain Dromard would confess to the murder of his wife, and that he would confess to Muriel that he had killed his wife to prove his love for her, to ask her forgiveness, and to tell her that he loved her. But the reality is totally different. The two lovers definitely stick to their story. Miss Bonin continues to explain the same story with as much detail as ever. As for Mr. Dromard, he continues to deny all allegations. He keeps declaring, "There's no proof." After 1 year in detention, Muriel Bonin and Sylvain Dromard are released, but remain under investigation. The judge will then order a reconstruction of the scene. He wants to know if the evidence gathered by the investigators at the crime scene and at the psychological level matches the scene on the night of the murder. And to optimize the results, he calls in a specialist, a blood analyst, who can analyze the traces of blood. On July 3rd, 2013, 3 years after the murder of Laurence Dromard, everyone gathered in the house for the reconstruction of the crime scene. traces of blood are still present, creating a very unique atmosphere inside the house. Miss Bonan categorically refuses to enter the house, as she insists she had nothing to do with the murder. When she arrives on scene, she feels sick, exhausted, and anxious. The blood analyst will now analyze the crime scene, looking at the bloodstains and trying to reconstruct the scene. According to her, the victim took the first blow, which made her bleed. The second and subsequent blows occurred when the victim was on the ground. The victim tried to stand up several times, but to no avail. Now it's Sylvain Dromard's turn to reconstruct the scene, explaining how he found his wife, how he tried to save her life. He explains the whole scene in detail, incredibly sure of himself. The only problem is that his lawyer is much less sure of the story.
During the reconstruction, Sylvain Dromard makes several mistakes. He explains that he's going to use a cloth to wipe the blood off his wife's head, then wring it out immediately afterwards.
And when he goes through the motions, he realizes himself that there are no traces of blood that match wringing out the cloth. His lawyer comes to his defense, explaining that the night he saw his wife, he was under stress, full of adrenaline, and that it's impossible for him, months later, to mimic the scene with near perfect accuracy. But despite this, Sylvain Dromard makes a second mistake. He had explained to the policeman that he hadn't called 911 immediately because he couldn't find the landline, and that a few minutes later he had realized that his cell phone was in the pocket of his jeans.
And that's when he grabbed his phone. Only thing is, his hands are bloody and there's no trace of blood in his pockets. And yet he had just wrung out the bloody cloth. According to the investigators, Dromard is totally lying. The judge decides to send the two lovers to trial, where Sylvain Dromard is the prime suspect, but without completely ruling out his mistress.
But a big problem arises for the court d'assises. There is no concrete proof Dromard murdered his wife. The details are wrong, but you can't accuse a person on details alone. Unfortunately, the prosecution has absolutely nothing against Sylvain Dromard. No murder weapon, no confession, no witnesses, just a neighbor who spotted Sylvain Dromard in the vineyards after the murder. But according to investigators, it's possible that this neighbor, an alcoholic, had an altercation in the past with Sylvain Dromard, that he went to the police several days later after having read about Dromard in the press and said that he had seen him drop things near a fire. This testimony was not at all credible in the eyes of the investigators. He also had no material evidence against Sylvain Dromard, but rather against Muriel Bonin, as she was the owner of the baseball bat, and she bought a second one to replace the first. For Muriel Bonin's lawyers, these accusations are ridiculous.
They explain that if she were involved in the murder, she would have taken more precautions. She would never have bought a baseball bat with a check if she didn't want to be spotted.
According to her lawyers, the alibi doesn't add up either, because on the night of the crime, she was home alone. So if she had premeditated a murder, she would have arranged to spend the evening at a friend's house in order to build an alibi at the very moment when Sylvain Dromard was committing the murder of his wife. And behind every accusation against Muriel Bonin, we always find Sylvain Dromard. He's the one who asked her to throw away her phone. It was he who came to pick up the baseball bat. According to Miss Bonin's lawyers, Mr. Dromard wanted to implicate his mistress.
They explained that, as a carpenter, he had all the tools he needed to kill his wife, and that he didn't need to come and get the baseball bat.
With no evidence, and the lovers denying any involvement in the murder, it's up to the 9 jurors to come up with a verdict on the basis of their personal convictions. On February 3rd, 2016, the trial opened in the court of Reims. But the main defendant, Sylvain Dromard, was missing. 2 days earlier, he had an appointment with his lawyer to work out the final details in order to improve his defense case. But on the way home, he had a serious accident on the freeway, his car sliding under a big truck.
A serious accident, since he suffered several fractures to his body. Some people even think it was a suicide attempt to escape judgment. In reality, there aren't many people left in his life. He has a lot to lose, including the love of his 2 daughters, who for the moment are supporting him while he awaits the verdict of the courts.
The president then postpones the trial, despite the presence of Muriel Bonin. The journalist then asked her a question. In your opinion, there's no doubt that he killed Mrs. Dromard. After a moment of silence, she answered, yes, there's no doubt, and I'll say it again on the day of the trial. The trial is set for June 27th, 2016. Sylvain Dromard is reinstated, and he appears free, as does Muriel Bonin, present that day. A surprising scene takes place in the defendant's box. Sylvain Dromard and Muriel Bonin are sitting on the same bench, but at opposite ends. This scene clearly shows 2 people who hate each other. They don't look at each other for the whole hearing, just shrugging their shoulders. It's a surreal scene, given the past of these 2 lovers. We observe a distant, cold, impassive Sylvain Dromard, even when the coroner recounts the horrific scene, even when he sees photos, even when he is told about his wife. Nothing. He's a man without emotion. He proclaims his innocence without a single word of love for his late wife. The jurors are quite shocked by his silent, wordless demeanor. He is simply a spectator at his own trial. He's not shouting his innocence. He's just there to say he's not guilty. And for the defense, that's rather strange. But the jury doesn't understand Sylvain Dromard's motive either. His wife tolerated his infidelities. He could have had it all. His wife, his mistress. They just can't understand why he committed the act. But then, could it be money? Divorce is expensive, especially since we know how important money is to Sylvain Dromard. Wasn't killing his wife the easy way out for Sylvain? But questions keep coming up during this hearing. What role did Muriel Bonin play in this affair? Did she orchestrate Mrs. Dromard's murder? Did she help Sylvain Dromard kill his wife? Or is she totally innocent? Muriel Bonin gives an image of a woman who knows what she wants, who dominates, and yet she passes herself off as one of Sylvain Dromard's victims. But no one in the courtroom believes her. According to the public prosecutor, if it hadn't been for Muriel Bonin, Sylvain Dromard would never have committed the crime. According to the public prosecutor, Sylvain Dromard was sentenced to life imprisonment for his violent crime against his wife. Muriel Bonin was sentenced to 20 years firm imprisonment as an accomplice in the murder of Mrs. Dromard. But the defense didn't intend to give in and asked for an acquittal for the defendants, hoping to leave the courtroom free. The court is severe: 30 years imprisonment for Sylvain Dromard and 18 years of prison for Miss Bonin. The defendants disagree and do not hesitate to appeal. 1 year later, a new trial opened in the Troyes Assize Court. Handcuffs on the wrists of the two accused. Muriel Bonin has completely changed, appearing gray-haired, very thin and wrinkled. She is very marked by her time in prison. The trial lasts several days, but everything is the same as the first hearing a year earlier. The same experts, the same questions, the same troubling facts for the two defendants, but no progress. On the eve of the verdict, Dromard suddenly announces that he has some revelations to make. He explains that he ran into Muriel Bonin with her brother on the way out of the house, and that they were responsible for his wife's death. But Sylvain Dromard's statement convinced no one, not the judges, not the plaintiffs, not even his daughters. But with his last-minute revelations, the husband has lost all credibility. On the other hand, Muriel Bonin has everything to gain, since Sylvain Dromard has just become a manipulator with this attempt to accuse Muriel and her brother one final time. The jury deliberates, and the verdict is in. Sylvain Dromard is sentenced to 30 years imprisonment, but surprisingly, Muriel Bonin is acquitted. Everyone in the room is shocked. Even Muriel Bonin herself doesn't understand what's happening. She bursts into tears. She would later say that she had fought all those years for justice.
Muriel Bonin is now free and has left the region to try and start a new life. As for Sylvain Dromard, he returned to prison to serve his sentence. But a few months later, he took his own life.
Thank you for watching this video.
We are excited to share these stories with you and to give a voice to the victims worldwide.
If you enjoyed this story,
you can help us out by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and punching the notification bell.
Very important, don't forget to give us your opinions in the comments.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Au revoir!